Today, we're going to talk about best practices for data recovery, or more importantly, to learn whether you're prepared for data recovery. I am with SolarWinds, specifically the MSP side of the business. Now, you might ask, well, who is SolarWinds or what is SolarWinds? Well, SolarWinds, we provide a suite of products specifically for managed service providers. This is a global product, and regardless of the size, the infrastructure, or the location of those MSPs, we give them the tools, the power to manage and monitor and secure and back up their customers' infrastructures without having to roll a truck or send a technician on site. They can do all this remotely and centralized, giving you the benefits of a IT staff without the overhead. So my name is Eric Harless. I'm the head backup nerd at SolarWinds MSP, and I'm one of a handful of head nerds in the organization focused around data protection, security, efficiency, and automation. I've been with the organization a little bit over 7 years, focused on the SolarWinds backup products, but I've got a little over 25 years of data protection experience in the market, in product management, sales, support, marketing, system engineering, and I've worked for a who's list of vendors out there, ones that you've grown to love and or hate, but I won't do any name drops there. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can reach me. My email is on the screen here, eric.harless@solarwinds.com. You can follow me on Twitter at backup_nerd, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you've ever got any type of data protection or disaster recovery questions you'd like to get answered. Obviously, you've got great resources here at Entree as well. If they can't answer those questions for you, they may get me involved. So with backup and recovery software, it's we realize that we're protecting people's livelihoods. We're protecting their legacies. People have been driven to build their businesses over time because they've got spouses, they've got children, they've got grandchildren, and they've spent the last 10, 20, 30 plus years building out a business, a legacy. Now, keeping that legacy out of harm's way is one of our purposes. It's a purpose that Entree takes to heart as well. It's why we do what we do. We're here to protect, manage, secure your environments so that your businesses can run and continue as normal. Now, if we start with some of this understanding around building data protection and recovery into your business, this is not about me selling you backup or trying to tell you how to buy better backup or provide scare tactics into getting you to provide data protection for your organization. It's really about being able to get your data back. Now, data protection is a worthwhile investment. It's peace of mind. It's like an insurance policy, hopefully one you never have to cash in on, right? Now, as you build your business or your industry, you did that by offering services to your customers, goods that they really needed. Now, you should demand that same type of thing from your data protection vendors, from your IT service providers. The technology behind the scenes needs to support you in the same way that you support your customers. Now, as we work with providers, you want to make sure that they're trying to understand what your business needs are. That way they can educate you where you need to be educated, and they can take a cue from you when it comes to determining what data is important to your business, how long you can reliably deal without that data. Do you need the data back in 2 hours, 4 hours, or can you handle 48 hours? Understanding the potential for downtime. It's also about understanding that one size doesn't fit all. So they're there to help you identify a data solution that can match the needs of your organization. It's going to let you protect the data that needs to be protected, and not try to sell you with features and functions you may not need for your particular organization. And there are a lot of products out there. You don't have to settle on the first product that's available. You may not be the right fit for the product you have today. You could be shoehorned into something that isn't the right fit, either from a retention perspective, from a configuration perspective, or just doesn't meet your budget needs. So don't let that lock you into your solution. There's lots of other options when it comes to data protection and recovery. Find the one that fits best for your organization. When you start talking with an organization about data protection, or more importantly, data recovery, because that's really what's key, they're going to ask you some key questions. Have your computers ever been down? And maybe this is an extended period of time due to hardware or a natural disaster, fires, floods, hurricanes, or maybe it's just random data loss or ransomware or a virus. If you think about that, and you look at how your reliance on the PC has changed in the last 5 years, or heck, the last year, with everybody working from home now and relying on all of these different systems that are interconnected, ask yourself some hard questions. Could you operate temporarily if you had no database, no CRM, no access to your website, or maybe your accounting software, or even your phone system? So many of today's companies are built on voice over IP, which is controlled and tied to a computer system in your organization. So how long could you operate without that? With just pen and paper in order to take those orders and to handle those calls coming in over a landline or a cell phone. And then, of course, what's the cost? What level of efficiency would you be able to do that? Could you do it for a day? Could you do it for a week? Could you do it for a month? Those are going to help you determine how much downtime you can really deal with without having access to those critical systems. The final thing that you want to know is how long it's going to take you to recreate the last 6 months or the last year's worth of that business data if you lost it. Just looking at a database of customer transactions or your accounting system. If you had to go back and recreate last month's inventory or last month's payroll, could you do that? And how long would it take? How much would it cost you in man hours to do that? Now, obviously, you can say it won't happen to me, and hopefully it doesn't. But those are famous last words. Those are typically spoken before bankruptcy or shuttered doors. And okay, I know you've got backups, but have you ever had to use them? Have you recovered from them? Maybe you've never needed them. Do you know they're going to be successful? Maybe you trust that your employees have not reused their passwords someplace, but it doesn't mean that their spouse or their child using the same computer that they're using to work from home hasn't managed to let a virus or a Trojan or a bad actor get into that system and compromise it. So there are a lot of things outside of your control and your employees' control. And Arctic Wolf did a wonderful job in the prior session talking about the threat landscape and the security aspects of it. Backup is that last line of defense. When all else fails, what do you do to make sure that you've got the data there and available to get your business back up and running? So, the thing that you're going to relate to the most is probably personal examples. An acquaintance of mine, not a customer, but, an organization with a 6-person law firm, they suffered a 2-week downtime due to malware, and just some of that data never came back. And that forced them to shut down and stop the business operations. That's anecdotal to a certain extent, but if you look around your organization, you talk to your vendors, you talk to your employees, they know somebody that's been hit by ransomware, that's lost data and that has not been able to get it back, or maybe it's hardware failure, or they were caught up in a fire or a flood or a natural disaster, and they can't get that business back up and running. If you think about it, you've got other restrictions out there too, such as out of warranty hardware. You've got Server 2003 and 2008. Now, hopefully those are all long gone inside of your organizations. But in case they're not, you've still got to back them up. Maybe you've still got regulatory or compliance requirements to be able to recover that data, even though you can't replace the hardware that operating system runs on. All of those are still things that we get calls on. And then, of course, you've got your traditional ransomware, your hardware failures, your corruptions, and your day-to-day file restores due to user error. So I'm sure somebody in the audience here is, relevant, has got relevant examples of data loss due to ransomware or hardware failure. Those are things you should be talking about with your coworkers. Obviously, we're not talking over the water cooler as much as we would have been typically, but share those experiences. Learn from the mistakes that other people make. Every time you see something in the news about ransomware and this company got hit, don't just take that away and be scared by it. File it, print it out, share it amongst your coworkers. Let them understand how people are being compromised, so that you don't follow those same paths and same mistakes. Now, just last week, I got brought into an example of a company. This was a law firm. They were doing basic backup in place using my tool, SolarWinds Backup. But they hadn't thought through the recovery time beyond just the day-to-day file and folder or single server recovery. So now they've got a 22 plus server environment that's encrypted and ransomed. We're talking about multiple terabytes of data, and they need to restore that over this minimal internet connection that they have. They're losing approximately $50,000 a day in revenue as those systems are down, and they're slowly bringing those back up just to limited constraints around their bandwidth and their infrastructure. Is this still fresh? This was a Friday call that I had with them to help them get as much going in parallel as possible. But I suspect they're still working on recovering data as we speak. Now, where did they go wrong? Well, they maybe didn't have the right layered security model in place. Maybe not the right training to help prevent the ransomware. But ultimately, once the ransom gets in, they need a solution in order to get the environment back up and running as quick as possible. They didn't have any type of secondary recovery environments. They didn't have internal secondary repositories of their data, what we call a local speed vault. They didn't have standby virtual machines sitting at a secondary location or in an offline mode that they could spin up in a moment's notice. They planned for single outage, single server, single directory, single file type of errors. They didn't plan for an entire site loss. Another example, last month, customer escalation, customer came in with a server failure, and the partner was prepared in this case. They spun up the failed system as a virtual machine. They had it running in about 4 hours or less. So that restored overnight, and the customer was able to utilize it in the morning while they worked on repairing the faulty hardware. And they called Dell or HP or whoever made that faulty RAID controller, and they got that shipped out, and they had the server back up and running in less than 48 hours. But there was downtime for the customer was less than 4 because they failed over to a virtualized environment that the MSP had managed or maintained. And now, had this been the only issue, they would have been up and running and everything would have been fine. However, it seems that wasn't the case. Less than a day after that, they had another hardware failure. Seems that the replacement component wasn't all that was broken on the server, and it took them back down. This meant that the customer had to fail back over to the virtualized environment, and that didn't work for us. It didn't work for them. It turns out they went to use the last backup that they had, and now the system wouldn't boot. And they tried and tried and tried before they got support back on the line to get the system up and running. And what it turned out to be was something as simple as a failed patch, a failed update, a failed driver or Windows OS update that was pending release or pending update. And then during the recovery, it effectively bricked the server. And the resolution, we were able to get to it fairly quickly, was to go back to the prior day and recover the prior day's point in time to get the system up and running. Now, this partner assumed that just because he had restored the data, 2 weeks prior, and then the 4 nights prior, he was able to restore at any point this data. But he wasn't doing selective spot checking of it to make sure that the systems were capable of booting after a Windows update. So scheduling recovery examples or recovery testing after your weekly or biweekly patch updates is a very, very good way to understand if that system is recoverable in the event of an error. I've got one more example I want to talk about here. Let's see. I've got to find my my notes on it here. So this is a manufacturing organization that I was working with. They had 12 servers in their environment, all virtualized, and then several dozen workstations and laptops. Now, this customer was doubly protected. They bought 2 different backup and recovery solutions, one for their server and one for their workstations. One was on-site and one was off-site. They thought they had their bases fully covered. They were trying to look at it from a budget perspective and have the important data off, the less important data locally, so on and so forth. But one of the employees VPN'd over the weekend and managed to infect the environment, and it got all of their systems, their servers, the 12 plus systems that were servers, plus the dozens of workstations were all encrypted at a file level. And they brought us in to try to help figure out what was going on. We quickly triaged the environment. We determined, where the infection came in, what systems were impacted first, provided some guidance on how to get the systems, at least the most important ones, up and running quickly. And then we kind of left the customer to go about the restore. But we found out about 24 hours later that this particular organization had stopped the recovery operation. They decided to pay the ransom. Now, whether you like that idea or not, ultimately it is the customer's data. They made a determination to pay the ransom in this case. So at that point, there wasn't a lot we were going to do to assist any longer. They'd stopped the restores from a data protection perspective. We wish them luck in the ransom recovery. decrypting the files. Now, it turns out another 24 hours later, they were back on the phone and they were having additional problems. It seems that the ransomware had corrupted their domain controllers. I mean, they could not log into the domain. They could therefore not access the files that needed to be decrypted with the decryption tool that they got from paying the $48,000 or $52,000 ransom. I don't remember the exact figure on that one, but roughly 50K. So in this scenario, we had to go back in and provide a couple additional options for them. We determined that they couldn't restore that entire 8 terabyte domain controller file server / application server across their limited bandwidth. That just wasn't going to work. They wanted to decrypt it, but they couldn't even get it to boot, much less log into it to decrypt the environment. So what we did is we covered just the C volumes for their domain controllers, their Exchange servers, their help desk system. And for those machines, just recovering the C volume as a virtual machine, we were able to then attach the corrupted data volumes, the encrypted data volumes, and then they could run those decryptors to proceed to do all the recovery in parallel. So a bit of a hybrid configuration. What could they have done better? Well, had they not had 2 backup solutions in place, they could have prevented the entire workstation environment from being compromised. Had they had mirrored copies of the data locally that were on secure NAS devices, they could have allowed for parallel simultaneous recovery. So it's not always the best thing to have, belt and suspenders when it comes to data protection and data recovery. It's better to have a complete solution and one that you've tested for those type of potential infections. So those are just examples of SolarWinds backup, where we've helped get the customer data back, or in some cases, the data is still coming back. And there are things they could have learned to make that recovery quicker or better or easier. But if you look at it in the news right now, there's a lot of other examples of ransomware and hardware failures where either they've relied on backup or they've not been able to rely on the data protection solution. And let's talk about how those would be analyzed by us. First is Travelex. So Travelex, if you know these guys, they're the guys that do the currency exchange in the airports. They were infected by ransomware early part of the year. They paid a $2.3 million ransom because their business was crippled by this. Now, as of Q3, they are currently in the UK equivalent of bankruptcy. So just paying a ransom does not ensure you get the data back, or it does not ensure that you are going to recover from the environment. Just one approach there where they weren't able to rely on the backups that they had in place, and they had to pay that ransom if they thought they could get back into business, although it didn't actually work out. Another example here, City of Lafayette, Colorado. City of Lafayette paid a $45,000 ransom after their devices became encrypted in July, and they had to get the decryption key from the ransomware creator because their backups were effectively useless in getting them back from a recovery perspective. Probably a case of either they were keeping local backups, they didn't have an offsite copy, or they had not properly secured the devices the data was on, and that was also potentially encrypted. Another example here, Michigan State University. This was May of this year. Michigan State, in this case, was hit by ransomware. They were also hit with a very large data exploit where the data was leaked. They actually determined they were not going to pay the ransom in this case. A quick quote here from them. It was important to remember that these are criminal acts being carried out by individuals seeking nothing more than an opportunity to earn a quick buck. So paying cyber intrusion ransomware is just perpetuating the crimes. Now, as I said, it's not my data. It's not Entree's data. It's your data. Ultimately, you have to be understanding about whether you would pay that ransom or take the steps into place to get the steps in place to prevent the need to pay those ransoms in the future. And that's getting that much more complex. Earlier this month, the U.S. government announced that they would be looking at steep fines, in cases where you are paying ransoms. So ransoms are effectively, illegal to pay a ransom. Now, it's not a criminal act, but it is a civil act. So going in and paying a ransom to get your data back could open you up to charges from Uncle Sam. So if we remember, it's about data protection and data recovery, not about backup. And if you understand the cost and the potential downtime and the fact that anybody can get into your environment if the door is just left slightly slightly ajar, it's great to have not just backup but recovery environments that are tested, that are we've played through the various scenarios where you've identified how quickly you need to get the data back, how successful you have to be in order to keep your business operating and running. All of those are going to be very, very, very helpful. Go beyond your backup, go beyond the data protection side. Think about it from a recovery perspective. Know exactly what you need to have and where you need to have it. Think about the lost productivity of your employees. For the 2 days, the 4 days, the 3 weeks that you're going to be down while you're retrieving data over a very slow connection. That may be enough to put you out of business. That's a case where you're going to want to have local recovery copies, local standby environments, maybe a secondary branch office that's keeping your backups and you keeping theirs, vice versa. It could mean loss of reputation. It could mean the ability to not be able to deliver on a project, therefore a lost client or a loss of faith in your clients that could shut your business down. So even a short amount of downtime could be detrimental to your organization. So think about this in a tailored type of solution. Look at products and offerings that can be tailored to your particular needs in your organization. You may have some other measure of low-end requirements. You can tolerate some downtime for your organization. Maybe you're not bound by any particular any regulatory or industry requirements. Maybe you don't need to recover, potential old or archived documents. It's only about today's business. Maybe you can be okay if it takes longer than a day or 2 days to recover some of those servers that are not mission critical. And you're able to accept that lower recovery, obviously at a lower cost. And that's going to be for some, 60, 80, maybe even 90% of your machines in your organization. But I would imagine some of them are going to have a high level of protection requirements where you can require or you can accept virtually no downtime. Maybe you must comply with regulatory or industry requirements on certain systems around data protection or around data retention, long-term archiving. Maybe you need those systems up and running right away, with a 5-minute failover or within an hour or 2 hours or at least overnight so that you can come in the next day and start working on those systems again. And those are cases where you need to be willing to spend a little bit more money to reduce that risk in the event that a hardware failure or a ransom attack manages to get through for your organization. Now, the way to look at that, the things I've suggested today, you could look at with just about any backup and recovery product or layered levels of backup and recovery products, depending on their offerings and their capabilities. SolarWinds, as a partner with Entrée, we've got a cloud-first data protection solution that's designed for that physical server, that virtual server, those workstations, your business documents, your Office 365 cloud-based backups, all from a centralized web-based management console. All the data can be stored off-site. It can all be mirrored or maintained locally on a local vault for rapid recovery. You've got capability to do standby virtual machines, can be booted in the event of an outage. You've got optional local vaults that will retain local copies that are secure and encrypted so that you don't have to pull it across that slow bandwidth connection that you're paying for. And then we can test your recoveries. Spin those up in a virtualized cloud environment or on-premise, create screenshots to prove that the data is recoverable and that it is, up to the last moment of last night's backup. So all of that should let you meet those varying customer requirements without having to search out through too many vendors. So with that, I think that is going to conclude it for today. I will be able to answer questions in the booth after this session. So please stop by. I can go through and show you some demonstrations. We can go through an actual sample recovery or look at some of the configurations.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it. If anybody, as Eric mentioned, had any questions for him directly, please feel free. Stop by the SolarWinds booth. I will be there as well. This is Chris Sutar with Entrée Computer Solutions. I believe the next session is to move back to the expo hall at this point in time. And we look forward to speaking with you guys. Thank you.